Maintenance. You should do it. I don't, but you should. Many parts of your car are designed to be checked and serviced at specific intervals. If you don't do this scheduled maintenance, things will fail at the worst times. I'm really bad at this. I change my oil most of the time I'm supposed to, but when it comes to things like lubricating suspension bushings or changing my diff fluid, I don't. Fortunately, I own a Toyota. Unfortunately, I take it off-road a lot and do some pretty abusive things to it. I have all the aftermarket suspension for these kinds of shenanigans, but that suspension doesn't require less maintenance, it requires more. It just allows me to do things like this without folding up my control arms in the middle of the desert. And I like to go out to the middle of the desert. I like to find rivers and beautiful scenery and giant rocks shaped like giant penises. But after tens of thousands of miles of abuse and neglect, the failures started to build up, and it became clear that I would need to do a serious suspension rebuild immediately. So I went on one more off-roading trip, but then I started to fix all of the things that are wrong with my 4Runner. I talk a lot on this channel about Future Matt. Future Matt is an excellent dude, taking care of all sorts of problems that I have left for him. Past Matt, however, is a total dick, ignoring the rattling and clunking noises in the car and generally driving it like a lunatic. Unfortunately, time marches forward and I am left to deal with the consequences of his actions. During my last ill-advised off-roading trip, the noises in my vehicle started to get louder and louder. This was partly my fault, entirely my fault, and try as I might, I could no longer ignore the obvious. So I went around and made a list of everything that was wrong. I had a flat tire, got that in the desert. My wheel liners are trashed. This was thanks to the spirited water crossing. My wind guard has lost most of its paint and looks like hot garbage. My shock tower is straight up cracked. That's not good. The rear suspension is flopping around and needs a complete rebuild. My front fascia is all floppy. The top LED lights don't work anymore. The front one never has. This probably has something to do with the abysmal wiring job. This is straight up embarrassing. I apologize for subjecting you to this. My left dash speaker works intermittently and can be fixed by hitting the dash. My awning cover looks like it has seen some serious action. The awning itself is pretty torn up and barely works. My reverse camera is not working. My tag light is out, I'm a few thousand miles late on an oil change, my brake pads probably need to be replaced, my key fob battery is dead, and the car is in desperate need of a wash. This might be a two-part video. Basically, I'm about a week away from my 4Runner going full Blues Brothers. I bought this car from a guy who off-roaded it all over the southwest United States. He added some of the parts, like the front bumper and the suspension arms, and then trashed this car all over the desert for 100,000 miles. Then he sold it to me, and I put a few more parts on before absolutely thrashing it all over the desert for tens of thousands of more miles, all while doing basically no maintenance. The fact that this car moves at all is amazing and a testament to the durability engineering at Toyota. Anyway, let's get to it. There's been a clunking in the rear suspension of my 4Runner for a long time. I crawled under there a couple of times to try to find the source, but nothing was obvious, so I opted to just let it get worse until it became obvious. And obvious it became. Under here you can see that one of my trailing arm bolts is loose. You can see where the washer was and where it is. This is the clunking sound. Underneath here is an oval-shaped slot. This is not supposed to be oval-shaped. Every time I accelerate, this bolt slides backward. Every time I slow down, it slides forward. Clunk, clunk. This is not good. You want your suspension bolts to be tight, but it's not as bad as the other side where the suspension bolt is straight up gone. It's not totally gone, fortunately. Part of it is still there, but this needs to be fixed, and soon. Suspension bolts are important. On the list of important fasteners, they're pretty much at the top. Car companies don't like to throw unnecessary parts in, but there is redundancy built into a lot of things, like lug nuts. They seem important, but you can get away with a missing lug nut for a while. I know this because while looking over my 4Runner, I noticed I have a missing lug nut. I vaguely remember losing one in the desert while changing a tire, and apparently I just forgot about it and never replaced it, so we'll add that to the list. Anyway, suspension bolts are important, so we're going to slide out this old one and put in a new one. At least that's what I thought we were going to do, but as it turns out, this bolt is stuck in there. I'm not sure how or why, but it's not coming out. So I'll just cut the head off and just lift the link out from the top. Easy peasy. Except it wasn't easy. It took 4 Sawzall blades. They're not that expensive, so it's not a big deal, except it also fried my Sawzall. But maybe we can fix that too. Not sure what's wrong with it, so we'll just take it apart and look at it. Maybe something will be obviously broken. Nope, everything looks good. The light here seems to be coming from the trigger and it's not coming on, so maybe the trigger is bad. Let's take that apart. Okay, it looks fine, I guess. Well, let's put it back together and see if it magically works. That happens sometimes. Nope. Well, we tried. That's fine. I got a lot of mileage out of this thing, and now I can get a better one. Back to the car. I did eventually get the link out along with the spacer and bolt inside. What happened is the spacer got rusted to the bolt. This might be why it failed. It got water in there and corroded away the base of the threads. Either way, we're going to need some heavy machinery to get this apart. I still need to use the spacer. With the rusted bolt out, I got a new bolt and nut and put it all back together under the car. We're not done here though. While removing the bolt, it became clear that the rod end up here is quite loose, so we'll need to replace that. Also, these ovals that we have back here need to be not ovals, so I will have to weld on some washers or something. I looked up the company that made my suspension links and found that they have rebuild kits, so I got all new bushings and spherical joints for the front upper control arms. They also sell replacement rod ends for these links, but I just found the supplier part number and ordered them straight from them to save some money. While I was waiting for all of that to come in the mail, I moved on to the next critical thing on the list. The next step is possibly the most difficult: getting this thing cleaned up. It is dirty, very dirty, inside and out. This will take lots of effort. So much effort.
How much for your best car wash?
The best one is $389.
How much for your third best car wash?
So that's done. The suspension on this car has been upgraded with some pretty nice stuff. The rear links and upper control arms are from Total Chaos, the shocks are from Icon, and the important bits have been reinforced or protected. The shocks are nice for serious off-roading, but they do have a relatively short service interval and they are in desperate need of service. I bought some temporary replacement shocks. These are going in the car so I can box up these shocks and send them to Icon for rebuilding. I actually replaced the rear ones a couple of months ago after the old ones decided to just pee damper fluid on the garage floor. I will send these back to Icon and ask if they can rebuild them. Ideally, they will say something like, yeah, absolutely. But realistically, I'm expecting something along the lines of, hell no! But we'll see. As for the rest of the suspension, let's get to it. The first thing we need to do is weld up those washers in the back. The clamp load from the bolt should hold these in place under normal driving conditions, but as we all know, my driving conditions are seldomly normal. I took these top links off one at a time so the suspension was still basically constrained. I probably should have jacked up the rear end to take the load off the rear, but I found it was easier to get the links in and out by just sort of jacking up one side or the other until they were unloaded. With the link out, I cleaned off the coating with a spinning wire brush of death. I also cleaned off the edges of the washers I was welding on. I ran a bolt through the washers and kind of centered them in the slot, clamped the bolt down slightly, and welded them in place. To help prevent corrosion, I just blasted spray paint all over the place. Hopefully this works. As for the links themselves, the rebuild was pretty easy. They have spherical rod ends on one side and a bushing on the other. The rod end was replaced by unthreading it and threading in a replacement. The bushings were swapped out and slathered with an abundance of grease. The other side went pretty much the same, except that bolt was rusted in place. Remember how the other bolt was rusted and half missing? Well, this one is rusted but still there. This meant I had to cut off not only the head, but also the threads of the bolt and wiggle it out the top like the last one. Fortunately, this was way easier because the panhard bar wasn't in the way on this side and I could get my cutoff wheel in there instead of going through several Sawzall blades. Of course, I could have removed the panhard bar on the other side and it would have been easier to get the other bolt out, but I didn't think of that at the time. But then if I had done that, I wouldn't have had an excuse to buy a newer, more powerful Sawzall. Anyway, I cut the head off the bolt and pressed the rusted out bolt like the last one, then swapped out the rod end and bushings. After the upper links were done, it was time for the panhard bar. Do they still call this a panhard bar? It's a weird name. I wonder where it comes from. Oh, it was because it was originally invented by the French Panhard Automobile Company. Panhard, originally called Panhard et Levasseur, is actually one of the first automobile companies, founded by René Panhard and Émile Levasseur in 1887, only 2 years after the creation of the Benz patent motor wagon, widely considered to be the first practical automobile. Huh. Anyway, the panhard bar. This is a simple link with spherical rod ends on each end. It would be really trick if this had left-hand threads on one side and a hexagonal bit in the middle so you could loosen the jam nuts and rotate the whole thing to lengthen or shorten the bar, but this is not one of those things that needs frequent adjustment, so it's just made with right-hand threads on both sides. I pulled off the panhard bar and swapped out the rod ends. I did put the car on jack stands for this, since the suspension is mostly unconstrained side to side without this thing. These rod ends are big. How big are they? Well, I built my Honda S600 front suspension with rod ends on the upper control arms, and those are smaller. You'd think that rod ends this big would be invincible, but no, they wear out. Probably because of all that normal, everyday driving that I do. Anyway, I replaced the rod ends and jam nuts, keeping everything roughly as long as it was when I started. The lower links were basically the same as the upper links, except without rusted bolts and without mounting slots hammered out into ovals. I was kind of expecting more rust on these since they're lower and see more water and ice, but no, they were fine. With all the links in, I went back and added gobs of grease to all the bushings. Hopefully this will keep everything from moving and prevent any future rust problems. With those done, the rear suspension was finished. So we'll check that off the list and we're basically done. With 2 things. This might be a 3-part video. You know what? Let's knock out a few other easy things. Flat tire. Check. Key fob battery. Check. Missing lug nut. That's a check. That's good enough. Tune in next time when I fix whatever the hell happened up here. It would please the all-knowing algorithm for you to hit that thumbs up and subscribe. Otherwise, when the AI takes over, you will not be spared. All hail the algorithm. Thanks for watching.